Hello, I'm Tara Brabazon, and welcome to the Post 109 Footnotes, where the margins matter. I'm so excited. So this post comes via request from Leenah. Hi Leenah. It's Leenah's second request for us. If you might remember, she was the one that suggested that great topic on the slump. So Leenah, you're amazing. But she also gave me a second request about footnotes, and I'll read a bit of that email to you. She wanted me to provide a post on, quote, footnotes in the dissertation, their role, their benefits, and perhaps expression of a scholarly voice, end of quote. How fantastic is that? Now, Leenah, I think you and I are linked because I've been thinking deeply about footnotes in our present academic life, and doing the research has transformed me and transformed my views. You see, there are two disciplines that use footnotes extensively, and they are, of course, history and law. And these two disciplines have an almost evangelical commitment to the footnote. But an array of disciplines in the humanities and the social sciences also use footnotes. But can I say, every now and again, in the experimental sciences, you'll see a really remarkable explanatory footnote, even if Harvard is being deployed. So this week, we're going to talk about footnotes. We have 3 stops. We're going to look at what is a footnote, and that's a big section, then how they are used, and we're going to finish off with an area that I'm really doing some deep thinking on, and that is why we're using footnotes and how perhaps they can transform the mess that international higher education is in at the moment. Yes. Now, there's been a delay between Leenah's 2 requests, I think about 2 months, Leenah, and we learned something about footnotes through this delay. The key books I needed, and as you know, I'm living in temporary accommodation. My books have been in storage for 3.5 years, but the key books I needed, firstly, a lot of them were in storage, and I couldn't rebuy them through ebooks because they were published 10, 15, 20, 25, and as you'll see on my reference list, 100 years ago, and they hadn't been reconfigured into an ebook. So I had to write and get these books via sort of secondhand bookshops around the world. And it took some time for those books to arrive in Aotearoa, New Zealand. But I think we learn a lot about the disregard of footnotes through the notion that the literature I required to configure this post for you was difficult to bring to me. So it hasn't been updated. It hasn't been migrated digitally. Let's think about that. Now, as I said, this session is important to me professionally. It's also important to me personally. Now, most of you know my first 2 degrees were in history. So I was taught to footnote and footnote well. Chicago footnotes are my life. I love them. They're elegant, they're beautiful, they're astonishing. But about 12 years ago or so, I realised that almost all the journals, and to be frank, probably all the journals in my second field, cultural studies, are using Harvard. Boo! Okay, now I don't use EndNote, I don't use Zotero, I do my references by hand. And there are reasons for that we'll talk about at the end of this post today. So when I recognise the changes in the journal, so just about all the journals I publish in are using Harvard referencing. It would take me a day or 2 days to change the references over. So I started to write my articles in particular in Harvard. And a bit of me died when I did that. But I also noticed I wrote differently, I engaged with research differently. It changed a lot in my career. Now, similarly, and remember, I've just published my 21st book, okay? Similarly, I've found that book publishers, scholarly monograph publishers, are just unable to manage footnotes. And I'm being really honest here, my last few experiences with book editors and book publishing has been diabolical, okay? So when in those books I did use Chicago footnotes, one of the editors, take a breath, Tara, one of the editors created this bizarre sort of Frankenstein's monster combination of Harvard and just bonkers footnotes. I mean, I don't know what it was. It was a Frankenstein's monster. So my last few experiences with copy editors and sub-editors with publishers has been dreadful, and they have, I believe the technical phrase is stuffed up. They've stuffed up my footnotes. They've stuffed up my references. So it was so catastrophic and put so much stress on me to deliver a proof that was accurate that I won't be returning to those presses again. But as you know, I have 2 books in progress right now, Claustropop and the Claustropolitan University. And Leenah's suggestion and doing the research for it has solidified my decision to return once more to Chicago Footnotes, because they're going to add elegance and depth to this work. So this post and Leenah's suggestion has meant this is what I am doing for these 2 books. And therefore I will choose publishers that have demonstrated their ability to handle Chicago Footnotes, rather than sort of squeeze my research into the sausage meat between 2 Harvard brackets. That's over. So our post today, let's do it. What are footnotes? How are they used? And the final, quite delicate section, why they should be used and what they can do for us today. Okay, let's go for it. What are footnotes? Now, footnotes are numbered and or starred references and comments at the bottom of a page. They are formatted differently from the main text, and they are separated from the main text. They're excluded. Now, why are they separated from the main text? There are many reasons, because a footnote may disrupt the flow of an argument. They are making a point perhaps that's not crucial to the argument, so it's a sidebar, it's offering a view and interpretation that's not required for the propulsive argument in the text. But they also may offer a digression, right? So, oh, that's way out there, knock yourself out. Now, those 3 reasons will be incredibly important to our work later on when we're thinking about the value of footnotes in our present. Footnotes live in exclusion. They live in the margins. They're present, but on the sidelines. Okay. This mode of marginalised writing captures something about research. Now, you'll notice they're called footnotes. It's named after the foot, that is, the bit of the body that is on the ground, is walking through the dirt. So we learn a lot there. So a footnote provides additional information, but it also gives credit to particular sources that have influenced, framed, and shaped the argument in the text. There is an elegance to footnotes. They're numbered consecutively through the document. They're a superscript number that appears after a piece of punctuation, every bit of punctuation except a dash. The footnote text is at the bottom. It's indented. It's single space. So it is a different part of the argument. It is a different part of our research. Now, there are 2 main referencing styles for footnotes: the Chicago style, woo, 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 and MLA, Modern Language Association. Yeah, nah. Now, footnotes are most frequently engaged with through the Chicago style. MLA recognises the force of darkness that is known as endnotes. Yeah, nah. Yeah, nah. So the formal purposes of footnoting are they provide a reference for a quotation or an idea. They provide further clarity for a point that is made in the text, so that the flow of writing is not disrupted, but the argument is made for readers who are interested. They also may offer a personal commentary, a story in the footnote, or they provide an example or an illustration of the point that we are making. Now, Anthony Grafton, I'll hold it up because I do have this. So this is one of the books that came a long way. Secondhand, bit rough, but there we go. So Anthony Grafton's magnificent book, The Footnote, A Curious History, revealed how footnotes have been described through time. And they've been described as sewers, toilets, and a way of distributing scholarly waste. So the argument is, metaphorically, all the rubbish in scholarship seeps down the page and ends up in the footnote. Now, academics fight a lot in footnotes. Alexander Pope used footnotes all the time to attack and injure the people he saw in opposition to him, and so did A.J.P. Taylor, to a lesser extent E.P. Thompson. So while these functions and these fabulous fights will return at the end of this post, let's just go to the basics to make sure we're all cool. So a footnote is part of the machinery of academic writing. It's a way to connect reading and writing, but it's also a way to connect your writing with reading for your reader. Fabulous. Footnotes are, yes, a way to reference, a way to cite, but they're also a place to offer observations and sometimes pretty tangential commentary. Now, you've often heard me say and describe footnotes using that great line from Obi-Wan Kenobi about the lightsaber, and I believe this. So footnotes are a more elegant weapon for a more civilized age. Yeah. Now, we live in nasty times. We live in ignorant times. Full stop. And Harvard referencing seems absolutely ideal for these ignorant times. Bracket, Brabazon, 2025, bracket, buy. The critiques of footnotes are clear. They slow down reading, they fill up pages, particularly the margins of pages, with absolute rubbish, but they're powerful, Leenah, because they present our way of thinking, how our argument was scaffolded for our readers. Now, footnotes introduce a different voice, a different mode of expression, a different way of writing. Now, this principle applies to marginalia, a word I love very, very much. Doug, my band in my next life is going to be marginalia. Talk to the hand. So marginalia refers to, we should do more work on marginalia, you know, the side scribbles, the underlining of text, sidebars, but also, of course, footnotes. And in footnotes, we have very, very expansive arguments and ideas. Why I love them and how I use them now particularly is, if I'm making an argument, that's great, thanks for playing. In footnotes, I try and always present the different argument, the contradictory view. So if someone radically disagrees with this argument, or 50 people do, then I give them the space to say, I've made this argument. Now just be aware, these 15 people have made a countervailing argument. Here are their references. This is the argument they make. For me, that is research integrity. I'm making an argument. People disagree with me. You have the choice to assess what you believe. So footnotes in many ways are a spot in our writing for complete organised chaos. Now, I know the numbers seem chronological and ordinary. The formatting seems quite elegant and predictable, but that space at the bottom of the page is hot and it steeps with arguments. It steams with arguments. And there are famous examples of writers whose footnotes are actually longer than the rest of their text. Pierre Bayle is a great example, but we have great scholars throughout history, the last 400 years, that have decided, you know what, I'm more interested in the footnotes than the rest of the stuff, so let's just do the footnotes. The footnote expresses an idea with honesty and with transparency. And look, academics, good academics, bleed. We bleed to find our evidence, right? We bleed, we suffer to get the evidence in place. And so what the footnotes do is they show a bit of that blood to the reader. That's honest. Now, arguably the greatest footnoter in history, and we all sort of walk in his naughtiness, is the historian and English parliamentarian Edward Gibbon and his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. For Gibbon, footnotes, I know, seem like a digression. Wow, what's going on here? But Gibbon used footnotes to create a vista, to create a landscape, to create a world in his writing. Now, while Gibbon's text in the body of his work was serious and it was scholarly, the footnotes were wild and allowed a whole different voice to emerge. He'd offer opinions, he'd abuse people, he'd tell jokes, he'd talk about ostriches. Yeah. So the Gibbon footnote, when I was a girl, when I was a young scholar, when people talked about the Gibbon footnote, that was a talisman for someone who's a bit fun, who's a bit wild, who's a bit lavish, who's a bit out of control, right? And that's fantastic. So we rarely see this mode of Gibbon footnote now. Well, why? Well, we got one bloke to blame for this, and I'm only slightly joking here. Leopold von Ranke. Now, he was the Palpatine of historians. Ranke, what a great name for a guy. Ranke changed history. He changed how historians think about sources and evidence and verification. The whimsy was gone. Gibbon and his ostriches were gone. Ranke was interested in primary sources and referencing the primary sources. So this is when we started to see empiricism in history, the use of scientific method in history. Are you kidding me? So supposedly rigor was back. It was really empiricism, but rigor was back, and so was discipline, and so was method. So the party people had left the footnote soiree at this point, and footnotes simply became part of the machinery of academic work. Now you'll note in Grafton's remarkable book, he described the footnote a great deal as an art. Footnoting is an art because they add plurality and light and humour and density to writing. And they also, and this comes from Grafton, this argument, they allow the reader to rest their eyes a little bit. So flick to a different place and think in a different way. The best of footnotes allow readers to see how an academic thinks and why we think that way. For me, there's not only an art to footnoting, there's a craft element here as well. We craft footnotes. Now they have their critics. Famously, Noel Coward, I'm a big fan of Noel Coward, famously Noel Coward said, quote, having to read footnotes resembles having to go downstairs and answer the door while in the midst of making love. End of quote. Thanks, Noel. So footnotes interrupt, but I would argue it's a productive interruption. Now, they do differ by discipline. In law, they maintain a crucial focus, a very different focus. And there's a tremendous article in 1988 by J.M. Balkin that really, for me, captures the greatness of the law footnote. They look very different from every other footnote in existence, really. But there are 6 types of footnotes, and the taxonomy I'm about to present for you comes from their role in the text. So let's do the quick taxonomy. There are explanatory footnotes. And by the way, this is used throughout all disciplines. Explanatory footnotes, these exist to provide further information, to provide clarification, or details that might be sort of intriguing, but tangential to the momentum of the argument in the main text. Now there may be, and this is very useful, clarifications that may be definitional. So the use of a word that is bespoke and particular, but you want to provide a definition for people that are not quite sure what's going on. Also with translations, this is great too. So when there's a word or a phrase that's been translated in one way and perhaps there is an alternative translation, footnotes are a great place to do that. We know that, just think about all our wonderful Māori colleagues out there, the great work being done in the Māori language to work through the Treaty of Waitangi, right? So that's a great example of translational work is actually the business, and the footnote provides the evidence for that. Great. Now the second type of reference are the referencing footnotes, right? Now these are at the bottom of the page, but they're not just references. So yes, they provide references in them, but they do something like this. So you've made a point in the main text, then you come down to the reference footnote, and it says, this argument is extended by Smith and Brown, who have investigated it particularly in terms of Chicago history. right? So it's a reference going, right, that point is extended with these people. So it's not just the citation, but it's an extension of the argument. 3, then we get to the bibliographic footnote. So this is the most common one. You've made a quote in the text, you've made an argument in the text, and this is a direct citation of that work. But it's not the Harvard Brabazon 2025. It's much more elegant than that. It's got the initial, the name of the book, the place of publication, the publisher, and the year. So it's a lot of information there that's on the page that's contextually resonant. 4, content footnotes. This is the material that again would disrupt the main flow of the text, but offers more personal comments or observations from the reader. So this is the place where someone would tell a story about what's going on in the text. Now, it may deflect from the argument, but it adds breadth and depth. I'll give you one example of this. So when I wrote my first book, Tracking the Jack, one of the sources I used didn't have cut pages. It was published in 1901 and the pages hadn't even been cut, and it was sitting in the Murdoch University Library. So I talked about that in this footnote, saying there's been so little interest in the relationship between Australia and Aotearoa New Zealand that this book has been sitting on the shelves since 1901 and no one has bothered cutting the pages. Right, okay. 5, the cross-referencing footnotes. Oh, these are fantastic. So this is like you are the tour guide through your text, right? You offer assistance for the reader in holding the argument together. So this will be, for example, you've got a footnote, this argument is extended in chapter 5, right? For further discussion of Smith and Brown's analysis, please refer to chapter 10. Great. So people go, all right, that's good. And we're going to come back to that again. Fantastic. Now, the 6th mode of footnote, the taxonomy, is, of course, the legal footnote. Legal footnotes are different from any other mode of footnoting. They reference cases, regulations, but particularly case law. So they look very, very different. And this is crucial to law research. And I love the fact that law researchers, socio-legal researchers, have stuck to their guns in this inelegant age, and they've kept using this mode of footnote that nobody else uses. This is tremendous, but it holds specific purposes for law, socio-legal. So these 6 types of footnotes are unified with a goal to provide supplementary information, certainly, but to also increase the verification for the reader and guidance for the reader. Okay, so we've got the what of footnotes. What are they? Let's now slam into how they're used. How? Now, footnotes basically have 4 reasons for their existence. They verify sources and evidence, so they are summoning academic authority. They are, secondly, reacting to critiques. So if you're occupying a particular position and most people disagree with you, footnotes allow you to show the evidence in its expansive nature to try and protect yourself. The 3rd way footnotes are used are to proactively get ahead of research. So if you've got some great research, you've actually, unobtrusive research, or you've done reactive research and you've got something hot, footnotes allow you to expansively present the data sets that get you ahead of the game, right? So it's a proactive, you're ahead, you're protecting yourself, but wow, this is powerful. And finally, and this is, I think, crucial now, footnotes allow you to construct a different way of writing, a different way of thinking in a text. There are, at its most basic, 2 types of footnotes. We've got our taxonomy of 6, but basically there are 2 types. There's the explanatory footnote and there is the referencing footnote. Now, they are different. Explanatory footnotes provide that additional information, the clarity, the commentary that doesn't mesh with the main text, and they exist to enrich and enliven a reader's engagement with the text. Bibliographic footnotes, surprise, surprise, cite the sources that we've used in our research and in our writing, and they contain detailed information so that our reader can identify these sources and indeed find them. Both these modes of research are fascinating and provocative in their differences because they add, firstly, style and flourish to our writing, but they also add rigour and verification. Isn't that amazing? So how they have been used through history is, I think, a powerful inspiration for us today. There have been famous footnotes and famous footnoters. Now, writers and particularly historians have transformed their prose through their use of footnotes. Now, we've already talked about the famous footnoter, Edward Gibbon. He certainly had critics. His friend, enemy, frenemy, David Hume, when reading Edward Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, stated, quote, "One is also plagued with his notes," end of quote. Plagued, great word there. So through much of academic history, the footnote has flourished. Academics footnote. That's what we do. But Jonathan Russell Clark gave us some sense of how they have been used through history, quote, "for the transmission of information, but occasionally to antagonise opponents for rhetorical asides," end of quote. But something happened in the late 20th century and through the early 21st century. Footnotes have been replaced by Harvard in most disciplines. Other writers, other writing styles are now using footnotes in a different way. Post-Chicago, footnotes are being used to experiment with writing, to probe the limitations of writing. Footnotes are also being used, in fiction particularly, to convey emotion, to offer some deep arguments in shallow times. So these experimental options for footnotes are increasing, which is our final stop of the day. Why use footnotes? Here we go. Footnotes are a way of thinking. They are a way of making an argument. In a time of emotions and vibes and superficial rubbish, footnotes leave the evidence, the argument, the verification, the scaffolded analysis for all to see. It is transparent, it is rigorous, it is ethical. Footnotes also offer a great service to a diversity of readers and a diversity of writers, because you see, they give readers a choice while they're reading a text. They can completely ignore the footnotes. I know a lot of people do. Ignore it, just read the text, thanks for playing. That's great. But they also provide opportunities for people to go, "Oh, that's interesting, I'm really interested in that. How was that argument formed?" And there it is. And then you can go and have a choose your own adventure and find your way through the prose. You can go and read somebody else and come back. That is fantastic. A post-Fordist reading strategy enabled through footnotes. Footnotes clearly enhance the readability of academic work. They can clarify and define complex terms and ideas. They can add context to an argument and offer reflexive commentary about whether or not the argument being made moves through time with effectiveness. So if an argument is made, and let's just give you an example, it's from a colonial or settler colonial perspective. In the footnote, very clear arguments using outstanding Indigenous and First Nations scholars can show that this argument, that's the dominant argument, has now countervailing arguments that are showing its errors. So footnotes gift professionalism to research. They confirm depth and they confirm consistency. But they also allow readers to simply enjoy the main text and not be bothered by any references at all. I know people think Harvard is this thing that doesn't, footnotes are terribly invasive. I despise Harvard because when we're writing, there's all these damn brackets in our sentences. I find that disruptive. Whereas, actually, here's the text, very elegant little number, and you can ignore it or you can follow it. That's great. So really, footnotes change how we read academic texts. But I also wanted to talk about respect. Footnotes respect sources, respect the scholarship of others. They don't slam a life's work into bracket Brabazon 2025 bracket. They, in real time and real space on that page, present the person. And if there are multiple authors, all the authors are present, not et al., all the authors, the full name of the text, the journal, the publisher, the year. So you see, footnotes are respectful of academic work and they're respectful of publishing. They are also respectful of differences. And this has been the transformative moment for me, really, because footnotes provide a space to talk about the people that we disagree with. We can respect their work and respect that disagreement. So outliers and differences are valued. So we start to think about the qualifications to our argument. We don't just present a line and go, it's true, data set of 1, I know what I'm doing, thanks. We can offer a clear statement, but then configure a footnote that shows different data sets, that show different arguments, and value those humans and their research. So we've talked today about the history of footnotes and how they've changed. And I would argue today, colleagues, we need footnotes for new reasons. To confirm reading in a post-reading time. To enable verification, certainly, but also explanation, stretching, challenge. To present countervailing information. To respect the people that disagree with us. Research is changing, research methods are changing, research ethics are changing, and the scholarly apparatus has got to change with it. So let me just offer one trajectory for what I'm describing as the new footnotes. Remember, I'm about to enter this discussion. I have skin in this game. I'm about to write 2 scholarly monographs, long, involved, complicated scholarly monographs, and through Leenah's suggestion, I am using footnotes. Footnotes are banished to the bottom of the page. They're excluded. They're marginalised from the main text. But remember Bell Hooks, quote, everything interesting happens in the margins, end of quote. Put another way, what is marginalised from the main text? And what is marginalised from the main text, if you think about it, is actually the foundation of the text. This is the evidence that holds up the argument. It holds up the page. It is marginalised, but it has an incredibly important role through that marginalisation to align interpretation and evidence. It's more than text. It reveals our way of thinking, and it provides another space for alternative views and alternative voices. Now, Zadie Smith in On Beauty, remarkable book that, but Smith said in On Beauty, quote, she lived through footnotes, end of quote. Powerful phrase, that stayed with me. We can transform how we live through footnotes, but we can also transform how we write through footnotes. They are writing tools. Yes, they are tangential. Yes, they are ignored. And Anthony Grafton confirmed that footnotes, quote, tell marginal stories, end of quote. They are stylistic architecture, moving between verification and interpretation, past and present. Now, Chuck Zerby described footnotes as, quote, the devil's details, end of quote. Love that. The problem is that we don't live in a time that values details. We live in a time of memes, 2 pages, executive summaries, opinion masquerading as expertise. But if we fight back, then that fight back is going to commence through footnotes. And the actual or the metaphoric footnote will allow us once more to value verification, evidence, and the capacity to check the work of others. Now, intriguingly, as I've been doing the research for this post, when I've seen the word footnote used in titles of books in the last couple of years, it's been strange. Lilia Don's Chasing Footnotes, Thomas Lorenzo's Footnotes on Life, and Jeffrey Kahn's Start with the Footnote, a trove of trivia and fun facts. Now, intriguingly, these three books with the word footnote in their title, they don't have footnotes in the book. But we also do have to remember the incredible, I get quite emotional, but the incredible Terry Pratchett biography that was going to be his autobiography, but Pratchett ran out of time through Alzheimer's and the impact on his memory and his writing. But this magnificent biography, now written by Rob Wilkins, is titled Terry Pratchett, A Life with Footnotes. Great title. And you see, that metaphor is used to capture the evidence, the life, the memories that existed around his great fiction. It was a life with footnotes. Therefore, it is time, I think, to acknowledge these metaphors, acknowledge how the footnote is being used in our present, but start to move this symbolism of the footnote into the reality of our writing. The gift of footnotes, Leenah, is that they allow multiple voices to exist in our writing. They provide verification and evidence in a time of feeling and vibes, but they render the margins meaningful, appropriate, and yes, visible. This is not simply about referencing and citation, colleagues. Footnotes are a way of writing, but they're also a way of thinking. It is, I think, the moment for us all to return to deep thinking about citation styles, the intellectual strategies and structures that we use. Let's return to the gift of footnotes, not as metaphors, but to enliven the margins and to engage the power and the diversity of our writing. I wish you love, light and peace. Tea out.